But what we're going to do the beginning of this afternoon is we're going to talk about the development of the HRL standard, and then we'll dig into the standard itself so that you understand what's inside the standard before we move into the practical exercises at the end of the day. So just a little bit about myself. I'm currently working as a systems analyst and human factors engineer at Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And before that, I was a Department of Defense contractor for 16 years. And so I did a lot of work similar to what Pam described earlier, although I worked with both software and hardware, numerous small, medium, large-scale efforts. The largest being the Global Hawk unmanned aerial vehicle, but all kinds of interesting technologies. I do have a doctorate and a master's degree in human factors, as well as a master's degree in systems engineering and professional certification in human factors and ergonomics. And my research background, vigilance and signal detection theory, target detection, visual inspection, some mental workload, and then most recently, human readiness levels. So the purpose of this section here is to understand the rigor behind the development of the HRL standard. So to understand the elements that make up the HRL scale and identify key events that occurred throughout the evolution and maturation of the scale. And then the second part is to gain familiarity with the contents of the standard itself, so that you can understand the layout and the contents, and then understand the general approach to apply the standard. So two main sections, development and contents. So for our first learning objective, we're going to understand the rigor behind the development of the HRL standard. And that's the key takeaway from this section, rigor. So keep that in mind. We're going to talk about the rigor that went into the development of the HRL scale and the standard. And one reason why we spend some time on this is that frequently human factors engineers get some pushback on, things are just subjective, it's only professional opinion. And what we want to demonstrate in this section is no, a great deal of thought and effort went into the development of the final scale that you see in the standard. The main message here is we did have inputs and reviews from a very diverse human systems community throughout the US and a few international folks that supported a very rigorous approach for the maturation of the HRL scale. So this is the HRL scale, which looks very much like the technology readiness level scale that many of you may be familiar with. It has 9 different levels, and activities are divided into 3 main sections, starting with basic research and development that occurs on paper and in the lab, moving on to technology demonstration, where various prototypes are demonstrated and user feedback and data are collected. And then the final phase is production and deployment. So moving into actually producing the final technology or system, deploying it into the field, and then collecting follow-up information on, is it still working in the field the way we thought it would? So as you progress from level 1 up to level 9, the intent is that the maturity in terms of human readiness will increase at the same time that the technical maturity is increasing. And there along the right-hand side of the slide, those are some of the benefits that come from using the HRL scale. And many of these mirror the benefits from what we've seen with the technology readiness level scale over the past 40-some years. So the intent is, it's going to complement and supplement the TRL scale by looking not just at technical maturity, but at human readiness. It provides leading indicators of human readiness. So instead of waiting until something gets fielded and we find out, well, users can't really use it, we get that information early and we can design things in so that the system is usable. It's going to identify those issues early in the life cycle. It's going to minimize cost of design changes. So instead of waiting until we're at, say, TRL level 8, when it's basically too late to make changes to the design, we're going to find things out earlier and incorporate them into the design throughout the process. Another key factor for the HRL scale is it supports decisions regarding time and resource investments. So if we get to, let's say, TRL 8, and we find out, well, we're at only HRL 5, that's an indication to our decision makers, hey, we've got to do something to make sure this system is human ready before it goes out into the field, or we're going to have bigger and more costly problems than we have right now and can fix. It's going to reduce human error in fielded systems because we're taking account of that very early and often throughout the entire life cycle, and enhance the user experience, a lot of what Pam has been talking about this morning. Ultimately, the HRL scale, like the TRL scale, it provides a single number for the decision makers. In this case, it communicates the readiness for human use to the decision makers. So now we're going to start talking about rigor. So these are some of the key events that occurred in the maturation of the HRL scale, starting back in 2010 and culminating in the publication of the standard in 2021. So the HRL scale was a little over 10 years in the making. Now, if any of you know Dr. Hector Acosta, he's the one who first proposed the HRL concept at a conference. And I wasn't at that conference, but I kind of imagined him saying something like, we have this scale that measures technical maturity. Why don't we have something that measures human readiness, human maturity for the human use? But that idea is what sparked then years of research and development. So we had a couple of master's theses at the Naval Postgraduate School that looked further into the HRL concept. When Micah Ensley was the chief scientist of the Air Force in 2015, she advocated for requirements to augment the TRL scale with an HRL scale. And so at that time, a DoD working group was formed to further refine the HRL scale with detailed descriptions. And they made some progress, but they kind of got sidetracked working on another effort. So they really never finished the HRL scale. And this is where I came into the picture. And I was working at Sandia National Laboratories. I heard about the concept of an HRL scale, and I was immediately intrigued. And so started delving into it. And my interest in initial research is what led into this next working group in 2019. So that was Sandia Labs, Old Dominion University, and the Naval Postgraduate School. We jointly co-chaired this second working group to take what the DoD had done and finish it and actually produce a usable HRL scale. And then in 2020, after the working group had finished fleshing out the HRL scale, we formed a writing committee through the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society to develop a formal technical standard for the HRL scale and submit it for peer review and approval through the American National Standards Institute. And in 2021, they did review and approve the final standard. It was released for use. It is available free of charge on the Human Factors and Ergonomics website. So just to go into a little bit more detail on the 2019 working group, and again to emphasize the rigor that was involved in the process. So there were 38 members involved in that working group that came from a variety of different organizations, Air Force, Army, Navy, Department of Energy. We had FAA representatives. We had NASA, quite a few folks from industry and academia. And two major activities that we were involved in, maturing the HRL scale. So taking what was already available and finishing that. So defining, first naming each HRL level, agreeing on those consistent names, and then describing what's involved at each HRL level. And the way we approached it, if you've seen TRL calculators that are available, they go through a series of questions to help you determine which TRL level is your technology currently at. So we used a similar approach for the HRL scale, where we generated questions to be addressed at each level. And those have to be satisfactorily addressed before moving on to the next level. So we finalized those questions. Again, we got input from all the members, and we agreed upon what needs to be asked at each HRL level. And then we also determined the exit criteria and supporting evidence. So how do you know you've finished this HRL level? How do you know that you're ready to move on to the next level? We specified those things. And the intent was the scale would, like the TRL scale, would be generic, that it would apply across different organizations, across diverse technologies. So we didn't use any sort of language specific to a particular technology set or organization. And after we did that, then we went through and did some tabletop exercises to determine if the HRL scale had utility. So we took 3 diverse real-world scenarios, and we had the members take a look at those scenarios in groups, and we said, all right, these are systems that historically had human systems issues. So if you had the HRL scale at the time that these were undergoing design and development, would that have made a difference, and where? How would it have made a difference? And bottom line was, yeah, that we demonstrated good utility in these 3 retrospective scenarios. And what we found was, even beginning at the very first HRL level, some of those issues would have been detected and mitigated. Comments that we got from the working group members, yeah, questions are broad enough to really cover a range of systems and programs. They're specific enough to ensure that HSI issues are detected and managed. The scale provides multiple opportunities to detect issues. So it starts out with, have you considered this particular factor? And then it moves on to, has that been satisfactorily demonstrated? Has it been satisfactorily tested and meets the required metrics? And then others commented, yeah, it supports outside the box thinking, because human systems experts, like other experts, tend to have a specialized domain. And so the HRL scale encourages people to think outside their specialty. Oh, if you're not into maintenance and sustainment, did you also think about these things that are going to be required for ease of maintenance? And then when we asked about usability, and remember, this was still very early when all we had was a very early prototype of an HRL scale. People actually rated the usability good to very good. And on the systems usability scale, the feedback we received, it's simple, it's easy to learn, it's easy to use. And so with the feedback obtained through the working group, we were able to improve and really finalize the HRL scale, the labels, the definitions, the questions. And that's what prepared us then to go into the phase of writing the HRL standard. So this is a slide for the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society Writing Committee. We had a total of 10 members, again, diverse membership here. Federal Aviation Administration, DOE through Sandia National Labs, Old Dominion University. So again, diversity. And then when we had the standard written, it underwent rigorous peer review. So first we had what's called a consensus committee, which consisted of 16 people in the human systems community. We basically contacted people that we knew, people who were recommended, and we said, hey, we're writing this standard. Would you be interested in reviewing? And we got 16 people who responded positively and said, yeah, they'd like to review it. Again, diversity. So people from Air Force, Army, US National Labs, industry, academia. But in addition to this formal consensus committee, which is required for ANSI approval, we also have what are called public reviewers. And so these are people who they find out about the standard. We advertised it on the Human Factors and Ergonomics website. It was posted in ANSI Standards Action circular. And they just said, yeah, I'd like to review that. And so there were 7 people who responded in that way. For them, we are obligated to address their feedback and incorporate it in some way into the standard, but they're not voting members in the same way that the consensus committee is. So everyone on the consensus committee gets a final vote to say, yes, I think this standard should go forward and be approved, either as is or pending changes. So this was our timeline. And I'll just say this is not really a typical timeline for a standard. We had some reasons for wanting to be finished by September 2021 in time for the Human Factors and Ergonomics Conference. So we kept our noses to the grindstone and really pushed to get it done. But I will say, a lot of the legwork was done during the 2019 working group. So we were well prepared to really write the standard and finish it. We kicked off in September of 2020. And by February of 2021, the document was ready for initial review and vote. And so that was both consensus committee members and our public reviewers. From the consensus committee, we had an 87% affirmative vote, which we only needed a majority to go forward. But we did receive 285 comments. So we had to incorporate all of that into the standard or, address it in some way. Not all of the comments were completely applicable, but we had to go through every single one of those and figure out what do we do with this. And then once that was done, we had to send the revised document back out to all the original reviewers and ask them again, now what do you think? And so this time, 15 of our 16 consensus committee reviewers completely approved. We had one dissenter who said, no, I don't think it should go forward. And what ANSI requires is if there's any disagreement, you have to work with those individuals and demonstrate that you worked through the process with them to figure out if there was a way to accommodate their concern. Now, you don't necessarily have to address it, but you have to demonstrate you went through that process. And so we did do that for, I think it was about 5 or 6 months that we worked with this person. And we were not getting to a resolution, but finally they said, okay, I'm done, just go ahead. I'm not going to pursue it any further. So we were able to finalize the standard, submit it for ANSI approval, and they turned it around in about 2 weeks and said, yeah, this is good, it's ready to go. And again, it is available free of charge on the Human Factors and Ergonomics website. We did that on purpose so that it could be widely distributed and used, with no charge. So we will move on to the second learning objective, which is working through the contents of the standard. So here again, we want to understand the layout and the contents of the standard, and then the general approach to apply it. And when I'm finished, Pam is going to go through a specific application of the standard and show how she used it on a real-world Army effort. But if you have your HRL standard available, either electronically or hard copy, be a good time to get that out. If you have that one-page fact sheet that we distributed, you might also want to have that out. Those will be helpful now and when we get to the practical exercises, because we are going to sort of walk through the standard section by section. Okay, so this is an overview of the standard. There's a main body, and then there are 5 appendices. And the entire standard is what we call informative, meaning there aren't shall and should requirements in it. It's meant to provide guidance and information. So there's no specific part of it that you can point to and say, oh, you must do that. It's really guidance to apply the HRL scale. The sections that I have highlighted here in this sort of reddish brown color, those are what I consider the meat of the standard. So section 7 in the main body on applying the human readiness level scale, the intent there is that if you're working with people outside the human systems community, people on the broader design and development team, your decision makers, your program managers, if they want to know, well, what is this HRL scale and what is this standard and what does that mean and how much extra work is that? You can point to section 7 for them to look at. It's meant to be brief, and we try to avoid jargon and technical language that they wouldn't understand. So that's what that section is for. The Appendix C is the guidance for the practitioner who is actually applying the HRL scale. So that's the detailed section for every HRL level that goes into detail on what questions need to be addressed, what are the exit criteria, what supporting evidence should you be thinking about to indicate that you've satisfied this particular HRL level. Okay, so the first section in the standard, the purpose and background, that's where we define the 9 levels of the HRL scale that I showed earlier, and we provide some guidance for their application. We talk about the purpose of the HRL scale is to evaluate, track, and communicate the readiness of a technology for safe and effective human use. It's meant to be used within existing systems engineering and HSI processes. And you may have gathered this already from what Pam presented earlier. It overlays on what we already do as human factors and ergonomics engineers or as HSI practitioners. It fits right in with what we already do. It's not really adding anything else except putting that number on it so that you can easily communicate the human readiness. We also specify in the purpose section that this standard is meant to be applied by trained and experienced human systems experts. And we put that in because, as I'm sure you've all seen, there are many people on design and development teams, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, people with no background whatsoever in human factors or HSI who want to try to apply these sorts of things and say, oh yeah, I can take care of the human systems integration as well as I can do electrical engineering. And as you all know, that really doesn't work out. So we try to emphasize in this standard, you've got to have the correct people with the right expertise and experience to really apply this standard meaningfully. It is not just a checklist that anyone can go through and say, yep, we did that and it's human ready. The background section talks about why do we even need to worry about human systems integration, emphasizes, yeah, do it early and often if you want to get the maximal benefits. And then we do cite some research that shows the benefits of properly attending to the human component of the system, minimizing or preventing human error. reducing costs associated with training, operations, and maintenance, and then improving human systems effectiveness to achieve mission outcomes. So we've cited some of the main research papers demonstrating those benefits to indicate, well, if you apply the HRL scale to do these sorts of things, here are the benefits that you can expect. All right, the next section, 4.0, is the Human Readiness Level Scale itself. So this is a high-level overview of the HRL scale. Table 4-1 describes each phase of design and development with respect to the human systems work, and it provides names for each HRL level. And as I described earlier, it goes through those three basic phases of the design and development life cycle, starting with basic research and development, moving on to the technology demonstrations, and then finally your production and deployment. That's followed by Table 4-1, which then describes each HRL level in more detail. Now, one of the things that we emphasize after we go through the HRL scale is the role of human users at each level, because it's not really a consideration in the TRL scale. It's much, much more important for the HRL scale. And so what we say in the standard, and the reason I'm going through this in detail is that it caused a lot of confusion during the development of the standard. We say that HRL 5 is the latest level to begin engaging representative users. Many people interpreted that that we were telling them, oh, you can't even involve representative users until HRL 5. No, that's the latest level to do that. You can involve representative users anywhere throughout the process. So even at HRLs 1, 2, 3, when you're still doing your research and design and doing things in the lab on paper, it's common to go talk to representative users, using similar or legacy systems, and ask them, what kinds of problems have you been having? What's working well? What would you like to see changed? So you can do that whenever. But we also use many other types of users, not necessarily representative. So samples of convenience, users of legacy systems. We will use users representative of the final target population. A lot of times, depending on where you work, you might use coworkers, you might use students to start getting some information. But by HRL 5, you need to be using representative users. Okay, relationship between the HRLs and the TRLs. So what we did here in section 5, we mapped the HRL scale to the TRL scale using several different major acquisition processes. So we used the DoD mapping, we used the Department of Energy mapping. They use different terminology, but they're very similar. But we showed here's where TRLs fit into existing acquisition processes, and here's how the HRLs would fit in with those TRLs. But then we spent some time talking about what's the risk to the program if the HRL and the TRL are misaligned. And that's what this matrix here shows. So if you look at the diagonal with all the green blocks, that's the ideal state where the HRL and the TRL map 1-to-1. They're perfectly aligned. That's great. That's always good news. But now, if they're not aligned 1-to-1, the program risk is going to vary, but it's going to depend on 3 factors. The phase of development, the nature of the lag, is the HRL behind the TRL or vice versa, and then the extent of that discrepancy. So if you take a look at the blocks above that diagonal, that's where the HRL lags the TRL above the diagonal. And you can see at first, If we're at a TRL 2 and the HRL is only a 1, not that big a deal. We call that a moderate risk. But once we get to TRL 3, we start getting a little concerned if we're still at HRL 1. And then beyond that, there's a great deal of concern if we're progressing in technical maturity, but not human readiness. So that's what we mean, depending on what phase you're in and the extent of the discrepancy. So if the HRL lags the TRL, the risk becomes more pronounced at about TRL 6 and above. And then we asked ourselves, well, what about the opposite scenario? Could you have a case where the TRL lags the HRL? And the answer is yes. But it does not necessarily represent program risk. A key system development process where this might occur is in software, where you can think about usability aspects of software before you have the final hardware platform, and you can start thinking about those elements before your TRL has advanced very high. But once you get to a certain level, you got to have that platform, or you don't have the whole system, and you really can't be assessing your human readiness. And so what we determined then is above HRL 7 through 9, well, you've got to have that platform, or you're kind of assessing something that doesn't really exist. So that's the intent of the matrix. And it's meant to be used to really communicate with the decision makers, the program managers, people outside the human systems community to say, look, if the HRL is lagging the TRL, here are the consequences. And it has implications for the cost, the schedule, the quality, etc. And you can also use it to emphasize, if we look at it early, before we've really gotten a hard design, we can make changes. If we wait until the design is set, then nobody ever wants to change it because the cost is going to be prohibitive. So this is one of the mappings to the DoD acquisition framework. Figure 6-1 is for the DoD, and figure 6-2 is for the DOE. Section 6.2 also discusses the mapping of the HRL scale to the fairly new DoD Adaptive Acquisition Framework. It was very new at the time we were developing this standard, and we decided to go ahead and address it. And there is an appendix in the standard that talks in more detail about that mapping. And I do know the Naval Postgraduate School has done some more work on fleshing out that mapping between human systems integration and this new adaptive acquisition framework. But as you can see here, we've shown the ideal situation where the HRLs basically align one-to-one with the TRLs throughout the process. Okay, so section 7 is the one I talked about for your program managers, your decision makers, to help them really understand what is this HRL scale all about and what does it involve at a fairly high level. So it's an overview. It's an overview of what the human systems experts are going to be doing when they apply the HRL scale. So it's designed for ease of conveying the standard to non-practitioners. And again, the detailed guidance for the practitioners is going to be in Appendix C. So once we get to Appendix C, this is the main section for practitioners. It's got detailed guidance for each HRL level. And Pam will talk about this, I believe, in her presentation next. Human systems experts can go through and identify applicable questions that should be addressed. So the standard is tailorable. It's meant to apply, again, broadly across different types of technologies and different organizations. So some questions may not apply. given the technology that you're working on or given the organization that you're working for. And again, we emphasize it's the human systems experts that should make this decision about which questions are and are not applicable. It's not up to the mechanical or electrical engineers or others to say, oh yeah, we're not going to do that question. We don't think it's applicable. Human systems experts determine that. But for every HRL level, there are 4 main sections in Appendix C. The questions that are to be addressed with descriptions, guidance and considerations. In other words, while you're working through this HRL level, think about these things, the exit criteria, and the supporting evidence. Now, at the very end of the appendix, we put in this overview table. I've shown a little snippet here. It's on page 74. But this table shows each HRL level, and every single question is to be addressed at each level. We put it in, we had a request from the reviewers to put in something like this. Some of them actually wanted it to be a checklist, and we did push back on that because we did not want it to be a checklist. It is not something you go through quickly and just say, yeah, check, 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 I did all those. We want, what's important in applying the HRL scale is the thinking throughout the process, the thinking, the demonstrating, the testing, not just checking off and saying, oh yeah, we considered the user limitations. But that's there for convenience, so you can see at a glance what are the levels, what are all the questions being asked. So this is an example for HRL level 1 of what you will see in Appendix C. So HRL level 1 says basic principles for human characteristics, performance, and behavior are observed and reported. This language is very similar to what you see for the TRL scale. And there are only 4 questions at this level because it's very preliminary. And I think Pam alluded to this earlier today, is when you're at these very early TRL levels where it's still basically just a concept, an idea, something on paper, something still very preliminary in the lab, you might get pushback that, well, we don't need human systems integration yet, it's too early. So, but there are some basic things that can be done at HRL level 1 to start thinking about what would humans be doing in this system? What kinds of capabilities should they have? Are there limitations that might interfere with use of this proposed concept? And to start thinking about what kinds of scenarios might be involved with using this idea or this preliminary technology. And the third question there, thinking about key human performance issues and risks. That can be done very early. So when it still is in the idea concept phase, human systems experts can start thinking, well, what are the risks for human users with this idea that's being proposed? Or what kinds of human performance issues might we see? Some of it can be based on similar or legacy systems, but we can start thinking about, yeah, what are the risks? What are the things that we should look out for through subsequent phases? And one other thing to point out about the questions in this Appendix C. So these are not questions about, how do you design a particular technology or system for human use. These are questions that are meant to serve as triggers, indicating while you were looking at human systems use, did you think about this factor? Did you think about maintenance and sustainment? Did you think about safety? So they are those sorts of questions that trigger, oh yeah, I forgot about that. We need to go back and look at that before we can move to the next level. And again, it's because as human systems experts, we'll specialize in a particular area and sometimes forget about all of the things that we should be looking at. So they're there really as reminders. So going on to the other sections in Appendix C, There's, again, guidance and considerations. And it's just meant to clarify those trigger questions. So again, I put some things in here for HRL level 1 on some guidance and considerations, some things to be thinking about. In particular, I'll point out that last bullet there in the box. Involving human systems experts at HRL 1 may enhance technical discovery efforts at TRL 1, and they can help guide a preliminary concept toward a tangible solution. So I think this is something that the technical designers often don't think about when they push back and say, it's too early for human systems integration. We don't need that yet. Involving the human systems experts may actually guide them towards something, a tangible solution, whereas in some cases, their idea may go nowhere. But with human systems input, to say, hey, you know how people might use this, or here's some scenarios where I think this could be useful, that could be helpful to the technical designers. Now, the exit criteria and supporting evidence, again, those are things to say before you can say that this particular level has been satisfactorily addressed and you're ready to move on. You need to verify that these criteria have been met, or that they're applicable and have been met, and that you have the supporting evidence. So for example, at HRL level 1, where we're looking at basic things like human capabilities and limitations, risks, very preliminary scenarios. So our supporting evidence might consist of, we have documentation of here are some key human characteristics, performance and behaviors that could be appropriate for this idea or this developing technology. We might have some basic research findings that are applicable, and we have documentation of those. We might have a list of key human performance issues and risks. So things that just show, yes, we worked through this process, and here's our evidence that we have satisfactorily addressed this level and are ready to move on. Appendix D has 6 different examples of how to apply the HRL scale. We have a variety of hardware and software, and we have examples where you're starting from scratch with a brand new technology or system, and then some where there's something already out there, but it might be being proposed for a different purpose or mission. And so we show how you would apply the HRL scale if it's already existing, but now it's being proposed for something else. And depending on the situation, you might start over at HRL 1, or you could start expedite the early phases of the HRL scale and start at a more moderate level. But we do also talk about sort of an intangible situation where it's not actually a physical product, but leadership training. So how the HRL scale can apply to development of training. And we do talk about, in each example, activities that you might use to address the questions at each of the levels. And finally, Appendix C, or Appendix E, is one that we added in part to address our dissenter, who he was really hard over on the HRL standard and the scale must look like what we have for TRLs and technology readiness assessment. And so those of you from the DoD are probably most familiar with this. There is a TRA guide that spells out how you work through each TRL level, what kinds of people you need, what you need to do. And so the center was kind of adamant that, well, you have to do that same thing for the HRL scale or it's not ready to go. And what our response was, this standard is meant to be broadly applied across diverse technologies, across diverse organizations. And it's really going to be organization dependent and technology dependent how it's applied. So we can't spell it out in the exact same detail that the technology readiness assessment does. So we compromised and we developed this Appendix E that says, broadly speaking, if you're going to apply the HRL scale, here's some things you need to think about. And first, like determining, well, when am I going to apply it? Does it have to be on every single technology? Am I applying it on nuts and bolts? Is it at a higher technology level? Do I wait until the system level? So we go through those sorts of things. Again, at a broad level. And at a high level, here's the strategy for thinking about applying the HRL scale. So again, it provides the single human readiness number intended to support decision-making at key milestones. So think about your decision gates for TRLs. The thinking is that the HRL would be applied at the same time. And the idea is this can guide future program direction, and it can guide investment of time and resources. And so I showed 3 examples here. The first one is a TRL of 2 and an HRL of 2. So good news, we're aligned 1-to-1, but we're also very, very early in the process. So very low level of maturity for both human readiness and technical maturity. So we don't know what can happen in later phases. The second example shows TRL of 6 and HRL of 1, and that's bad news because technical maturity has advanced to a very high level, but we're still at the most basic level for human readiness. So what that says is we have something that's technically mature, but people may not be able to use it at all. It may need a lot of training. And so this indicates to the decision maker, hey, we need to invest some resources, some time, or something to get the HRL in line with the TRL, or we're going to have big problems on fielding. And then the last one, again, shows a good alignment, but now we're at a very high level of technical maturity, and it shows human readiness kept pace. We're in good alignment. So this is a system that once we put it in the field, it should be technically mature and human ready. Okay, those are my references. I think that's all I have for this section before we go to Pam. So are there any questions for me?
One question. So you mentioned that the latest you can bring in, or you should bring in the representative users is a level of 5 or 6? 5?
5.
What do you think is the ideal level to bring in the representative users?
So I would say 3 or 4. 3 because you're really at the end of your sort of paper or laboratory concept development, and you're getting ready to move into actual prototypes and demonstrations. So I think by the time you get to your prototypes and demonstrations, you really ought to be using representative users. But as anyone can attest, that's often not under your control. So you kind of have to use sometimes what's available. But yeah, I would say level 3 or 4. Don't know what Pam would say.
She said 1. Okay, I think that's all the questions in the room. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
So I'll just add that the human readiness level scale really talks about basic research in the beginning, the initial HRLs, but I don't do basic research, right? I'm a HSI practitioner, so I am not doing basic research. So I changed this to meet my needs, and I changed the word basic to user. So I do user research. So, the scale's flexible. People need to try it out and see how they can bend it and see if they can break it. I haven't broken it yet, I don't think. Okay. So off to a real world use case, right? Now, this use case is a retrospective. I didn't start out trying to apply the scale, I just took all that user-centered design process that I talked about this morning, and I saw how does it map into HRLs. So a lot of what you're going to see, and so I won't spend a lot of time on it because you've already seen it in UCD, right, when we talked about that, and in usability. So you will see that it's what I already do, and I've just mapped it in. So I want you to understand the relationship between UCD and the HRL scale, and I'll do that by discussing my typical UCD process and describing the activities that I conducted, the data that I collected in order to support the HRL scale and answer all those supporting questions that you saw underneath each one of those HRL scales when Judi showed that graphic. So I'll share this process and the activities, and it'll be for a specific program. It'll be for that Advanced Field Artillery Tactical Data System that I talked about earlier, AFATADS. Now, while I do this, I would like you to check off. I'm going to have the deliverables, what I did, then I'm going to have the questions underneath. So as I talk about what I did, I want you to think in your mind and check off those questions. Did I answer them sufficiently so that I can move on to the next HRL level? If you have any questions, ask me, and we'll see what you come up with at the end as far as an HRL rating, and we'll also talk about, I'll tell you what the TRL was at that time, and we'll see how well they align. All right. One thing I've learned in my over 20 years working for the Army is that acquisition process can be messy, right? So our funding model for HSI typically begins just before milestone B, and you can see there are so many HRL levels that we should have answered all these questions before we're even involved. And if we're not involved till there's a funding bill payer, that's not good. So we have been trying to get involved much earlier. But, you know, you don't want to get involved too late because then it's hard to do UCD coming in at the end. So like I said earlier, I matrix to the PM, so that just makes it, and I'm 100%, so that just makes it easier for me to be involved throughout the process. As I mentioned, also in acquisition, the focus is not on basic human systems research per se, but on applied research for a specific user community with specific needs, right? So for me, it's field artillery users of command and control systems. And because there is almost always a next system, it's important to continue to collect user feedback even after the system is fielded. So it just never ends. What I did here is I plotted the HRL levels underneath where I think I do them to show how I see the world. As you know, the entrance can vary. I showed you my Dagger example where I got involved with milestone C. Then you're finding issues, and it costs time and money to get the program through and resolve those issues satisfactorily. For me, to answer the question from online, in what I do, I cannot use populations of convenience for my work, or I will have my validity will be questioned. So I can only go to my target users for what I do. And so that's what I do. No matter how small the question is, if it's a small question, I do an online survey. If it's a larger question, I go to the users to find out. So for me, that's just the way it works. We already talked about this a little bit, about the process, right? So what's going on here is the Army decided that it was time to modernize this antiquated 30-year-old software. The PM challenged me to ensure that the design would be intuitive. It needs to have an intuitive GUI that would reduce training right now from 120 hours to 40 hours. The only way I could figure I can do that is to make the design intuitive. We have to follow those usability targets. We have to make sure they're things that are easy to do. So I accepted his challenge with the caveat that he championed a soldier-centered design process with iterative feedback loops, and that this process would be embraced by the developer, and that he would work with me in collaboration to meet all those stringent usability targets that we have, because that's the only way this is going to happen. So this system of FATEDs is used to provide automated support for planning, coordinating, controlling, and executing fire missions for weapon systems such as mortars, cannons, rockets, missiles, close air, attack aviation and naval surface fire support systems. One of the main goals for this operator is to ensure that air and ground are cleared before sending a fire mission to the guns at a very high level and very basic. So you've seen this UCD process before. It's just shown a little differently, and we generally move in that clockwise direction through the different processes and conduct the different user-centered design activities. We revisit them as we need to. So we may be doing, working on wireframes and say, oh, I don't know, what a user needs in order to accomplish this task. So we'll go back and we'll find out that information to inform that wireframe. I wondered how well my UCD process how well it mapped to the HRLs, right? So I looked at the activities, my data I collected, and the HRL questions that are answered, and these sticky notes show the mapping. I don't know if you would consider this messy. I consider it just the way that it's showing how flexible the standard is. You can adapt it to your needs, which is what I have done. So at HRL 3, let's see. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Next, I'll work through the HRL scale and describe the UCD activities that we performed during the software development process. And as I do this, I want you to decide whether or not I've answered those questions. And I have rearranged the questions in the order that they are actually answered, not the way I performed those UCD activities. All right, HRL 1. These questions focus on key user characteristics. See, so I changed it to user characteristics. Their behavior, their performance and behavior has been observed and reported. And the questions are below for that HRL. Okay, here's what I did. I did a literature lit review. That's how I always start everything, right? And I looked at the military occupational specialty, the MOS standards. I looked at the Army entrance tests and what their scores are and what kind of capabilities do my users have. And I talked about that earlier, right, in UCD when I showed you my 13 Fox, 13 Juliet, 131 Alpha. Okay. Then I looked at previous assessments and field and test incident reports. And lo and behold, IBM did a heuristic evaluation years ago. So I got a copy of that, and I looked at that, and I saw what issues they found. They had just done an expert review based on documentation. They didn't really have the software, and they came up with lists of problems they saw. And so lo and behold, we used that as our jumping off point when we went out to do focus groups. We asked about some of those issues, and lo and behold, what did we find? They were all still present, unfortunately. So, but we had a starting point, right? And we looked at there was a previous HSI assessment. So we looked at that, and those issues were still there. Then we conducted that contextual inquiry, observational study, that ethnographic study, where we went out to the National Training Center for a month, and we watched them work at different echelons, and we captured all that information on what they used the most, what problems they were having, all of that. We wanted to understand their information flow. How do they conduct their missions? Then we identified the risks across the different domains, and we began some mitigation planning. These are the things we're going to have to look out for in the future. We didn't come up with any answers at this point. It's still very early. We wanted to really document some of the user stories, how they do their work. What's that story? How do they do a fire mission? And what are their key characteristics and what are their issues with that currently fielded legacy system? Looking back at some of the characteristics of my users, they have to have normal color vision. That is, unless they have a waiver. I looked at their ASVAB scores. They have to have a security clearance. They need to multitask. They have to work under pressure. And there's a lot of teamwork involved. And there's a lot of memorization. There's a lot of artillery data and a lot of analytics. So they have to keep a lot of information in their heads and for processing later on. And so it told us that we needed to look at ways to automate some of that within the system where we could and to help augment human performance. All right, make your assessment. Do you think I answered all those questions? Anybody think I didn't? All right. HRL2, here too, user research and development. Yes?
You said you looked at the ASVAB scores. Does that affect like the users that you look like? Because I assume if they scored low, you didn't use them.
They all had to meet the scores or they wouldn't be in the job.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. But it does tell you kind of where they fall out. I mean, if they're getting a 93 or a 96 and the average score would be a 50, you know they're in the top. And in fact, for their scores, they're in the top 20% to be field artillery men, women. All right. Let's see, HRL2. So here we're looking at user-centered concepts, applications, and have we defined our guidelines. So here we had conducted structured surveys and that design-focused task analysis I talked about earlier. We saw our patterns of use and disuse. We had our focus group feedback from discussions and questionnaires. We had an online survey that 253 people actually responded to. I was amazed. Like my product support manager thought, you're going to get thousands of responses. And I'm thinking I'll be happy if I get 50. You know? But I was surprised. We did have a good response rate. And then I did some lit reviews to see what design standards were out there. I looked at field artillery manuals to come up with all that information. And also, this helped us identify, what are the critical tasks that they perform, the frequent and the problematic. Where do we need to really focus our design attention? I keep saying that over and over again, but that's important. And I already talked about how we did all this, so I can go ahead and move along. Do you think I answered these questions? We did start to look at that style guide. We knew we needed one, and this is when I came up with the data item description that did, so we could make that contractor deliverable, procedural, so they could actually create their standards for their GUI. Okay. HRL 3. Here, human-centered requirements to support human performance and human technology interactions are established. So there I am pictured at Fort Sill with Charlie Hernandez, who was my colleague. He worked for a few years with me until funding got really tight, and then he now works on other programs. He did a lot of this early HRL 1, 2, 3 usability testing with me. And another thing we did was we matured our training and support strategy. So here, it was a 3-level strategy. The first level is you're going to have an intuitive system design. What that means, it meets our criteria, our usability targets, right? The second level is you're going to have persistent contextual help. Tool tips, things along that line. It's going to be there, hover over, things like that. Just so information is immediately available to users. They don't have to be guessing what to do next. More recall than recognition versus recall. And then we also had the third level is embedded training. And we developed our usability targets. We designed our guidelines, documented. I showed you that spreadsheet earlier with our GUI requirements and guidelines. We provided that to the developer just so they had a heads up on the things that we're going to be looking at. And here's the style guide contractual deliverable. And we started looking at our proof of concept as well, both the system conceptual model and the style guide that contained the system's design philosophy and the artifacts of the GUI's layout and all those graphical elements. including icons, drop-down menus, navigation, colors, all of that. And we really did build, like one of our goals is to build extensive error checking into the user interface to help the user along the way of doing their fire mission processing. HRL4, modeling, part test, testing, and trade studies of user interface design concepts and applications are completed. So here we were doing part test testing with wireframes. We were doing our semi-structured interviews. I talked about our participatory design already. And we were doing our low fidelity usability testing, you know, some of the initial concepts. We also did, let's see, what's this one? Okay, that is that survey I showed you earlier. It's a little representation. There were two different design concepts we were looking at. It was A/B test. And here you see underneath the results for accuracy. And we were able to have a good foundation for picking which design direction to go in. So we were looking at preliminary designs, requirements, feedback. And 5. Here we're looking at user evaluation of prototypes and mission relevant part test simulations to have they been completed to inform design. Okay, so we increased our fidelity of our usability testing. We were having a FATEDs, talking to a FATED, sending fire missions. We had it connected to one of our simulations systems so they could shoot fire missions with simulated guns. And here we were tracking all of our metrics by task, engineering, release, and aggregating them over time. Okay. We did not get to, we had a stop work order. So that's as far as we got in that process. And now we haven't done anything for over a year, and now we're on track again with government developer. And so for HRL6, I had planned, here we're looking at human systems design fully matured and demonstrated in a relevant high fidelity simulated environment or actual environment. So here I would have increased my usability testing to high fidelity, something like I did earlier with a DevOps, where we have more interconnected systems and they're using them in a more realistic scenario. And then 7 through 9, here you're really doing full tail testing with production and deployments ready systems. So here I would have done new equipment training evaluations, logistics demonstrations, customer tests, which are field experiments of using the equipment in a very realistic scenario. And then, of course, formal test and evaluation. And then post-fielding user satisfaction assessments, do some more contextual observation, and the formalized trouble ticket system, finding out now that it's been deployed in the field and is being used, you know, how can we improve it for the next software release? So before the stop work order was issued, we conducted 49 STPs with over 1,000 warfighters who had over 10,000 combined years of field artillery experience. And that's just to level 5. So wondering, our TRL rating is a 4. What do you think our HRL rating was? You don't have to yell it out. You don't have, it's not a 1, right? I did okay with the 1. I did okay with the 2. I did okay with the 3. I did okay with the 4. Now, is it a 5? Let's go back and look at 5 real quick. Oh, it says part task simulations completed. Nope, I didn't complete them. So I think I was at a 4 when we stopped. So we were aligned. We were. All right, so we had the stop work. We have a new acquisition strategy, and we changed to a government vendor. Where are we now? What HRL am I at now? Do I have to go back to HRL 1? Ha. So I don't think we have to totally go back to 1. But what I did was the new user interface design team, UX team, I kind of started out at one again. I brought them out to do focus groups with users so they could learn for themselves about their users, because I could tell them and I could say, read those papers and you'll learn about your users, but there's nothing like going to them and listening to them, right? And hearing about their problems and hearing their feedback in real time. So that's what I did. I brought them with me, and that was our STP1. Now they are working on wireframes, and I talked about that a little before. We did our first, I went out and conducted focus groups with the wireframes for them. And now they're working on their content for their third STP. And we're hoping that they get a little bit more interaction. They did have a demo of the early software capabilities working, hoping to get some more so we can actually at some point get users hands-on. So really, I just talking about how I went from the HRL research and how I brought it to practice, right? Really, I think it brings structure to the best practices to bear on real-world application of HSI in the acquisition process. So, it just gives you some more structure. I think it facilitates multidisciplinary HSI considerations because you have that standard set of questions. And like Judi said, and I forgot to mention, safety. Safety is important, right? So during one of our usability tests, I work very closely with the safety software system engineer. And during one of our usability tests, he doesn't come out with us, but any issues I find, I relay them back to him so he could work them through his process, because he has a whole process that he follows. So imagine, you know how form fields autofill from the history you've, the things you've filled in fields. All right. Imagine the last field you filled in was your present position grid, your coordinates for your position. And now here you are, you're going to do a call for fire. And what populates into that field? Yes, you are right. It populated your present position. So we found that in a usability test. I told the software safety engineer about it, and he took care of getting it mitigated. So I didn't have to track that. The software guy did, the safety guy did. It also facilitates multidisciplinary HSI considerations using a standardized set of questions. Very nice, easy structure to follow. And it provides a single human readiness number to communicate, the system's effectiveness. So I like having that single number, and I know how ATEC is always looking for that single number, and I think this is something that might be attractive to them as well. It aligns with the UCD process. I hope I demonstrated that over and over again. And it's easily understood because it complements the TRL scale, and it really does provide a PM data, the data they need to balance time and resource investments against the readiness of the system. I'm not going to talk about that, but just a heads up. Once our MVP is done, I've already seen the RFI that's out there. They are going to actually change the whole software process, and they're looking to combine two of the programs into one. I don't quite understand it. I'll have to read the RFI myself, but things are going to be changing, and we are following the software acquisition process, which is one of the DoD system acquisition framework paths to follow. So as far as how do HRLs translate into that pathway, well, I'm going to be finding that out in real time. All right. So now I'm going to go back to Judi.
All right, everyone. We're in our final stage here. What we've planned is some group exercises so that you can get some practical hands-on experience applying the HRL scale to 3 different scenarios. And so what I'm going to do here is just get everyone set up by briefly describing the scenarios. These were available in your read ahead packet, but don't worry if you did not have time to review those because they're pretty easy to understand. Okay, so What you should do in these scenarios, think of yourself, you're the human factors expert on a design and development team, and your job is to apply the HRL scale throughout design and development so that you can assess and report readiness for human use. So the design team is meeting to decide what the current HRL level is and its implications. And what you'll need to do is read through each scenario and then in your groups discuss and answer the questions. We have 3 questions for each scenario. And then we'll come to get back together as a group and do our report outs for each scenario, and then wrap up with final discussion and questions. But what I'll do right now is just briefly run through each scenario so that you get an idea of what they are and can decide which one you would like to work on. So the first scenario is a robot upgrade. So in this example, there's a robot that's already existing and fielded, and it's been used for a specific purpose, but now they want to repurpose it and use it for visual inspection for metal fatigue on aircraft. So the robot previously had a final TRL of 9 since it was fielded and it's currently being used to support mission operations. However, users have complained about a complex interface that requires extensive training. Now, when the robot was originally developed, there was no comprehensive human systems evaluations. So right now, there's no comparable HRL rating for the TRL rating, and there aren't any records of previous human systems evaluations to use. The design and development team has been assembled to handle the modified design. And that team consists of mechanical engineers, maintenance engineers, visual inspection experts, and human factors engineers. Some work will be needed to develop the GUI to handle the robot's new application. Now, in the meeting, the mechanical engineers state they are going to start at a TRL of 5, the component or breadboard validation in a relevant environment, because they say the basic principles and concepts are the same, only the nature of the mission is changing. So they plan to begin by making some hardware and software modifications and demonstrating the robot in the new relevant environment. The mechanical engineers further state the HRL rating should also be 5, since the TRL and HRL ratings are supposed to map 1-to-1. So the questions to think about for this scenario is, how would you, as the human factors engineers, respond to the mechanical engineers about the HRL rating? What HRL rating would you assign at this point, and what evidence would you provide? And then what are the impacts on system development if the HRL rating lags behind a TRL rating? So that's the first scenario. The second one is a software development scenario. So there's a software system that facilitates development of task lists and assignment of units to selected tasks that's being developed for military mission planners. The first step provides a task selection process that allows the planner to choose tasks to support mission requirements. The second step is a unit assignment process, allowing the user to evaluate the characteristics of candidate units based on the operational environment. Alternative unit assignments are evaluated by choosing effect categories and evaluation criteria and performing user rankings. The software design team has identified user roles that the system should support, and they've identified and prioritized system tasks required to support those roles. They've also provided a contextual scenario that illustrates how the users would interact with the system. The design team also has a graphical prototype of the user interface to evaluate the initial design. So the questions for this scenario: what HRL level do the design team's current activities seem to support? What key activities from previous HRL levels are missing? And what is the impact to the HRL determination if no TRL evaluation has been made? So in scenario 3, this is an equipment transit case scenario. So we have a mobile communication system that was developed to support voice and data services for deployed military units without the need for a fixed infrastructure. The communication system is packaged for deployment in a transit case, and that's transported with the deploying unit and installed on a command vehicle. The current system TRL for the transit case is about a 6 or a 7. During a recent design review, it was noted that the transit case, loaded with all the equipment, weighs more than 200 pounds. And the case has 4 handles, indicating that it requires a 4-person lift. The maximum 4-person lift weight, according to Military Standard 1472, is about 150 pounds. So the questions for this scenario: what HRL does the excess weight issue limit the system to? How is the TRL level misleading with respect to this human issue? And what does the gap between the HRL and the TRL levels say about the system risk? So those are the 3 scenarios. And what we're going to do is divide into 3 groups in the room and 3 groups online to go through the scenarios and address the questions. We'll take about a half an hour to do that, and then we'll come back and report out and wrap up.
Hi, Judy.
Hi, Pam.
So our groups here in the room are ready to report out. Works. All right, Judy, we're going to ask the groups. You had 2 groups, I guess? Just one. Okay. All right. So if they could type those up while we're doing our readouts here, and then we'll read it out. Okay. Who's the spokesperson? Me. Okay. Here you go. So this is the transit case group.
Yeah. Hi. Yes, so this case seemed very straightforward, but we wanted to make sure to try and say as much as we can because we think the customer might not like our news. So our news is that at level 1, HRL level 1, we're basically doing readouts and surveys, that sort of thing, and we notice at this point, at this level, that there's an excess weight on the case. We write down other things as well, like we write down the dimensions of the case. It was even suggested that there might be voice communications that are necessary for interacting with the case. So we basically survey all that information. And the problem might be at that level, but we're going to keep going. Okay, so we go to level 2, and now we're looking at interface types questions. So we're looking at the case has handles, and that's going to be useful for interaction. We're loading the case onto a vehicle, perhaps. We have to know for those dimensions if it makes sense for the vehicles. We might be dealing with a lift or dealing with a dolly in that sort of interaction. But we really start to get into trouble at level 3, and I think that we can't go past 3 because 3 is where we actually take the measurements that we have, the weight measurements, and we notice that we definitely have a problem with with military mil standard 1472 that was mentioned. So we definitely have a problem at level 3, and that's going to be a real issue because once we get to level 3. We're comparing that with a TRL of level 6 to 7, so those are really mismatched, and it's going to be a pretty bad lag. So in the matrix, it will be high risk, very high risk. So yeah, to me, I just wanted to comment on this. It seemed like the kind of thing that you have to deal with in human factors, which I'm not, is dealing with having to go back and telling a tech person like me that we've got a serious problem here. So anyway, that's it.
Judy, do you know what case study the online group chose?
No, I haven't seen anything online.
All right. So it sounds like Lily knows that she has the answer. So they did the robot upgrade. Did Judy, did you want to address what the experts think about the transit case?
Yeah, I just want to point out this one is a little bit tricky because early in development, it may not be known how much this case is going to weigh once it's filled with all its contents. So it's kind of a back and forth, a iterative trade-off here, determining how much it's going to weigh once we've determined what all the contents are going to be. But yes, with the 4 handles, it's limiting the number of personnel to 4. So you could have fewer, but you can't have any more than 4. And so that's kind of the issue is depending on how much it weighs, do we need more handles? Do we need to allow more than 4 people to be able to transport it? And then that TRL rating is misleading because it implies that, well, there is already a prototype that's available for demonstration and really ready for production and deployment. But the case with its contents weighs more than 150 pounds and it's only got these 4 handles. So that suggests they really haven't done the demonstrations with the users. So that's why it implies that we're at a higher technical maturity than we actually are. So I think that's all I would add for that one.
Okay. Next, we're going to go on to the software development case. And I assume you are the speaker with your notes.
You did take excellent notes.
Sure. For question number 1 was what HRL level do they seem to support? And we kind of debated between 4 and 5. Settled on HRL 4 because while they do have a graphical prototype of the user interface, that's not really a full prototype. So we figured it was more like they were working on a model and the part task testing. So we said HRL 4. So for question number 2 was anything that we saw missing from previous steps. There was no mention of any trade studies being done and also any performance measures or anything like that. We did think that they accomplished everything in HRL 1 and 2, although that's a little bit of an assumption, but it seemed to be done. And then for question number 3 was, what is the impact to the HRL determination if no TRL evaluation is made? Is that you have to make a lot more assumptions due to ill-defined technology and or models. And we kind of debated on if the HRL level can ever actually exceed the TRL level because you can't model or prototype anything if it's not actually defined. So it was a discussion we had internally. Back to you.
Okay, Judy.
Yeah, good answers. That's what the answer in the back of the book was really. HRL 4 is what we thought. But yeah, they hadn't done everything leading up to HRL 4, so there were some things missing. But it seemed like with their static display that's about where they were. But then because it is software, and this is something that is specifically addressed in the standard, they can get a little bit ahead of the TRL. So there are some things that can be done just software-wise before you've made that final determination on the platform that could be accomplished. But yeah, there's a point where you have to have that integrated hardware and software before you can progress with your HRL level. So around 4 and 5 is where you really need to know what's the hardware.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to the robot upgrade.
All right.
So first question, how would you respond to the mechanical engineer about the HRL rating, which he claimed should be a 5? We disagreed. He made that claim because he said, TRLs and HRLs should map 1-to-1, which while we agree with that in an ideal state, they need to be independent assessments. And based on all the information provided in the case study, it's definitely not an HRL 5. So we disagreed. Number 2 was really like the follow-on to that question. So what would we rate the HRL? And we said HRL 1, and reasoning because the original system already had no human factor evaluations or any records of anything being conducted during its development. And they're trying to take that original system and modify it for a new mission. So we said it would be an HRL of 1. And the third question, what are the impacts on system development if the HRL rating lags behind TRL rating? We deemed it to be excessive program risk, could lead to an unusable system and potential misuse or mishaps.
Okay, Judy?
Yeah, great answers. Spot on.
Yep, great answers.
Yeah. So yeah, basically you have to go back to an HRL 1 with this robot being repurposed, especially since no human systems integration work was done previously. But there is a possibility that they could expedite the HRL ratings and catch up pretty quickly, just depending on the situation. But yeah, in this case, because we are talking about hardware, it is a very high risk when the HRL rating lags the TRL rating to that extent. If they can get the HRL rating to a 3, then the risk would be reduced to a high level. But yes, good answers.
Yes, and we also had good answers from the online group. They pretty much were in consensus with the group here. Again, HRL 1 and not HRL 2. And they need to get involved earlier, and there's a large gap in level 1 to 5 there, so there's high risk. So great alignment there too. So if the people online would like to type up any feedback that you would like to provide to us, that would be awesome in the chat. And then I'll talk to the group here what feedback you have for us or any other questions. Okay.
This is an easy one. No, yeah. So earlier in the presentation, you mentioned you tried to do soldier touch points quarterly. I think you said, who funds that? I know you're matrix to the PM, but is your funding like palmed 4 years in advance? Like who do you get the funding from? The PM? Yes. Okay. And is there a set budget you get every year? I mean, because I think you said, we went back to, you wanted to have the next set of people go back and go to HRL level 1 and redo it. So how do you get that approved, right?
For the vendors, thank you. For the vendors, we tell them they need to include that in their budget. They need to have a travel budget. For us, it comes out of our PM travel budget. So for me and the system engineer, or if the APM comes, it comes out of our budget. The vendor themselves have to pay for that. Yes. Yes. Okay. All right. One more question over here.
Yeah, I'm interested, since you've worked on both kind of the PM side and the AEC ATEC side, how would you encourage kind of use of HRLs in the kind of system life cycle? What can AEC and ATEC do, and what can kind of PMs, how can you get PMs to be more proactive about human system integration?
So I've been on a personal mission to try to get HRLs adopted. And I even appealed after we did our workshops, Judy and I and Holly, we did workshops down at Human Factors and Ergonomics Society 2 years, and mostly attended by vendors, by contractors. And they were so excited because they told us they need leverage to get involved in system design development. You know, they have a lot of pushback. It's true of everybody doing human factors. It's just a lot of pushback for doing these things. And so they thought HRLs would be a really good forcing function. And we agree. I agree. And plus, it's just a nice measure to have, and you know where you stand, and it's so easy to understand, right? And then you can ask for the pile of deliverables to believe that they did it. Because when I briefed it to the Joint HSI Working Group, and I said, you know, they had a committee, and they decided that they didn't want to adopt the standard DoD-wide because the pushback is that they thought that people will say we're at HRL 5 when they're not. They were worried about that, so they didn't want to adopt it without some mechanism of validating that you're really at that. But I think if you just can prove it and can document what you did and what you found to answer those questions, I think that's all you really need to validate it. And anybody could read it like you guys did today, right? You listened to what I had to say and you said, yeah, you did HRL 1. Okay, you did 2. All right. So you could judge that from what I told you. I think most people can do that. So after that meeting and the contractors were so, you know, the vendors and everybody was so excited, I went back and I talked to them. I gave them another briefing. And I said, can we please move forward on this? Because now I'm hearing from the field that, you know, our vendors, our human factors counterparts and HSI practitioners in the vendors want this because it's a good forcing function. But they still hesitated and I didn't get any traction. So then the next thing I do is I just keep plugging along, right? I'll just keep documenting it. I'll just keep trying to get the word out on what I'm doing. We did talk to the DevCom headquarters HSI office. They are believers. DAU, talk to them, they're believers. So, I mean, they're out there. It's a movement, and I just think more people have to do it to demonstrate that it is something doable by us all. And it's not hard, and we can do it. And then I think it'll be a lot easier to get it accepted. Another question.
For the whole like UCD process, are there certain activities that coincide with certain phases of the acquisition cycle that, for example, do you use like fishbone diagrams, stuff early because there's no physical prototypes, and then once you do have physical prototypes, you do, you know, whatever, experimentation with focus groups, and then like, is there any sort of quick cheat sheet of breakdowns of which activities better align to certain phases?
So in that one UCD activities where I said this is my phased approach, understand, visualize, and evaluate. And I kind of had them broken down, but sometimes they cross over. Like when I was talking about what I actually did, you know, sometimes you have to revisit. But yes, there are certain UCD activities that make sense to do at certain points in the acquisition process. Like I would hope you have your observation studies and finding out that initial user needs early, not late, right? And questionnaires can be used throughout. It all depends. What is the data that you need to drive your design decisions? And that really dictates what method you're going to use to collect data. Okay.
I have an online question if you're ready. So from Jennifer Baker, she says, is manprint still used or has it been replaced with HSI? How can I get someone to move away from that term? How are they different? I started in this field 4 years ago.
Okay, so yes, manprint is no longer, it was replaced by HSI. So years ago, when there was manprint, the Air Force was thinking about airprint, the Navy was thinking about seaprint. For whatever reason, it did not take off. So instead, industry and other, you know, the other services were going towards human systems integration. So then the Army changed to be in step with everyone else. How do you get people to stop using Manprint? I mean, I still see it every once in a while in documents that will do Manprint, and people who did it years ago still think Manprint's around. You just have to tell them that, you know, here's 602-2, the Army Reg, and it says human systems integration. It's Manprint has been replaced. I think this happened around, I don't know if it was 2012 or 2015, but it's been a while. Yes.
Thank you. This is a question I started to ask you at lunch, and I just wanted to repeat it in case there's any input from anybody who wasn't a part of our discussion then. I'm in a situation where I'm involved with the development of a user interface or a dashboard, like you called it, and I was curious if there are any resources or references that you would recommend that give a framework for that design process, which I think falls under the user-centered design activities from from your first presentation.
Let me get back to you on that. Let me see what's out there. I mean, I have a bunch of books at home, and I'm sure that some of them might be helpful references to you, but I'll also look in the ACM CACI library and see what's in there. A lot of times they have things as well as human factors and ergonomics. So I'll check those two sources because I have access to that. And Judi, I don't know if you have any more that you can think of good design resources.
Yeah, but I'd have to go back and look in my files. But yes,
Okay.
I recall seeing some things about dashboard design.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Thank you. Anything else? Any more from online? No? Well, thank you. You were a great group. I really enjoyed your group participation and your readouts. You were spot on. So thank you. Judi, do you have any final words?
A couple of things. So we will send out an electronic copy of the expert answers to those scenarios to everyone who attended today. And then I just want to reiterate too that one reason why we did develop the standard was so that there would be something that could be put on a program of record, something that's already there and that could be put on to facilitate incorporation of human factors and human systems integration. And as people have been seeing, it's not easy getting the HRLs adopted, but like Pam's doing, just going out there and using them and demonstrating it's simple, it's informative, it has benefits, it can be done, is helpful. Because that's one of the things that we are hearing at Sandia Labs is there's reluctance to formally adopt the HRLs because they want proof that they're effective, that it's value added. And we can't get that until people start using the standard and the scale. But people don't want to use the standard or the scale unless it's built into the requirements. So we're kind of in a catch-22.
Yeah.
But I will say that one thing that's been encouraging recently, the current FAA authorization bill has dictated that the FAA will formally explore human readiness levels and the standard and investigate how they can be incorporated into their existing acquisition cycle. And Pam and I have seen some of the work that's being done to demonstrate that. So it looks like FAA could be a potential early adopter. I think that's it, Pam. Thanks.
Okay. So even though I'm not able to get the standard on contract or anything, when I do develop my HSI plan, and I expect to be, after these UCD activities, I expect to be at this HRL at this point in time in the acquisition process. This HSI plan is something that everyone must agree to, even the vendors. So in effect, it's become a requirement. So it's kind of a backdoor way to do it, but that's all I have. So thank you all very much. Be safe out there if you're driving home or if you're here for the rest of the week. Still be safe. Thank you.